Hey, creative souls. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm really happy that you're here. My name is Johnny. I am a published fiction writer and a retired adjunct writing professor. For 2 decades, I helped college students get their words on the page. Now I help people write novels, and I teach fiction writing and screenwriting to adults in custody. I believe I'm on this earth to heal the world through stories, whether it's the ones that I write and tell or the ones that I help you write and tell. I call myself a word witch, and if you want to know more about what I mean by that, check out my video called On Being a Word Witch. I'm new here on YouTube, and I fully embrace the notion of energetic reciprocity, so anything you can do to help me grow my channel, if you hear something that resonates, if something I say encourages you or inspires you, I would greatly appreciate your likes, shares, and subscribes, because obviously the more people I can reach, the more I can do in my quest to heal the world through stories. Because as I always say, stories can heal the world, so let's do it together. So with it being a new year and all, and thinking about goals, I don't do resolutions per se. I make changes all throughout the year. So the new year isn't really a time for me to, draw a line and do something new unless there's something that I do want to change. And one of the things that I have been wanting to change is to read more. I used to be such a book hound. And I don't know about you, but the pandemic ushered in all kinds of bad habits, some that I still haven't shaken yet. And one of those is the amount that I read or don't read. And what happened during the pandemic for me is I started watching way too much TV and movies. And, I can justify doing that because I'm a storyteller and I can say, oh, I'm doing research. That's always kind of my joke. And while there may be a smidge of truth to that, in my heart, I know that it's become my virtual addiction. And so it's something that I am really committed to working on now. And so I wanted to do a list, and maybe I'm doing this more for myself than anyone, I don't know, but I wanted to make a list of reasons why I think it's really important for writers to read. I think it's really essential to having a healthy writing practice. And as I mentioned, I used to be an absolute book hound from the time I was a little girl. And, I've gone through periods in life where it's kind of come and gone, but I really want to get it back. I feel like reading brings so much to our lives, and it's something that I'm very committed to right now. So I wanted to share these tips with you. Before I get to them, I wanted to mention that every year I make a reading planner for the year, and it's a gift that I give to my email list. And I wanted to offer it to you, so if it's something, I will describe what it is. And if it sounds like something you could benefit from or that interests you, you can just go to my website, johnnymazzacco.com, and right there on the first page, you will see where you can get it. So the way it works is this. It's a downloadable, digital, fillable planner. And for each month, I have it broken into 4 weeks. And there are fillable fields so that you can enter book titles and authors, and then another field where you can enter the purpose. So the reason you want to read the book. Is it for pleasure? Is it for research? Is it for self-improvement? So then you can kind of see where you're putting your focus. And if you want to focus more in one area, if you want to balance them out, then you'll be able to see that right there in front of you. Then for every month, I also have a second page that's called Notes and Takeaways. And this is where you can just jot down notes to yourself after you've read a book about the main thing or things that you are taking from it, whether it's where it took you emotionally, whether it's something new that it taught you, and if it's a piece of research that you need to use. And you can even note like pages that you need to go back to and whatnot. So it's very condensed, but I have found it to be really helpful. I've used mine in the past, and part of my New Year's Eve ritual is to take note of what I've accomplished the year before and then to make plans for the following year. And this spills over into New Year's Day. And so that's how I spent my New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. I got so much pleasure out of filling out this planner that I created. And so I have my reading for the entire year all planned out. And, you can do that. You can do it month by month, whatever you want to do. But the beauty of it is that it's digital. And so say I get 3 months into it and I realize, whoa, I can't read this many books in this amount of time, because I tend to be a person whose eyes are way bigger than her stomach in almost every area of my life. So if I need to make adjustments, I can just cut and paste and move things around easily. So I love it. I'm kind of obsessed with it, honestly. And if it sounds like something that might benefit you, like I said, please go to my website, johnnymazzacco.com, and you can download it and start utilizing it. So now let's get to the purpose of this video, why writers must read. So here's number one. You'll learn new ways to tell stories and create structure. So you'll be able to pick up on how other writers use certain writing devices to accomplish things, and it will give you new ideas. So for example, there is a book called The Moon Sisters, and it's by Teresa Walsh. And what she does in it is she uses point of view to help create structure. So she allows these two sisters, Olive and I'm forgetting the other sister's name, but each chapter she alternates chapters so that each of them gets a chance to speak, and they go back and forth. And it's about the same story. They both have recently lost their mother, and they're grappling with their grief and how they can move forward. And so, as you know, if you're part of a family, we can all experience the same thing, but we're all going to have a different point of view about it. And it's sort of like, I think I've used this analogy before in some of my videos, but when I used to teach argumentation, as I would always tell my students, if I send 4 of you out to a park and ask you to stay in one corner of the park, one of you is going to see, say, a beautiful fountain. One's going to see a bunch of kids playing. One might see a big pile of trash, and another might see a fight. All right, so you're each going to have a very specific viewpoint of that park. The one who saw the beautiful fountain will have a higher recommendation of the park than the one who saw the fight or the pile of trash. Okay? When those 4 people report back to me, I will have the greatest perspective, the better perspective, the most informed perspective of what that park is. And so, in doing this, what Teresa Walsh has done is she gives us 2 different perspectives of the same story. And it's really effective. And I know this isn't the only novel that does that. You know, there are plenty of novels that use different point of view. It can get very muddled and messy, but I like the way that Teresa Walsh kept it really clean and clear in this. And we know right from the very beginning what's happening, what she's doing, and so then we know how to read and move forward. And that's also really important. Okay, another device that you might think about using, and it also has to do with point of view, but here's a book recommendation I have. If you have not read Lori Moore's collection of short stories called Self-Help, I highly recommend it. And what she does in it is she uses second person throughout in every single story. And I usually recommend to people that they use first or third primarily, because second can be very challenging to use, and I'll do another video about point of view in the future, but second person is very hard to pull off. But if you think you might want to play around with it, check out her short story collection called Self-Help, and you will see how it's done masterfully. It's just amazing. Or we might also think about, for example, how Toni Morrison uses italics in, I think it was in The Bluest Eye, I'm pretty sure. She uses it as a way to demonstrate flashback or memory. And then Faulkner used it in The Sound and the Fury to help make shifts in time. So the number one reason to read is because we can actually learn a lot about ways to use different writing devices. Okay, number 2, how others use language. This is close to the first point, but a bit more refined, a little bit more granular. So if we look at another person's work, specifically to see how they use language, it can be so helpful. And this isn't to suggest that we want to read other writers to try and change our own voice or suddenly use language differently. It's just more of a practice in observing and kind of letting it seep in and wash over us. And eventually, it will just naturally and organically impact our own writing. So if we look at how someone uses syntax, how they string their words together, the length of their sentences, the variation in the length of their sentences, and how that creates a rhythm, right? Because when we read, we are hearing it in our mind. And this is, side note, one reason I always recommend to people to read your work out loud, because when you hear it out loud, and I don't think we hear our own writing the way we hear other people's. And so that's why I recommend reading your work out loud, because then you can start to feel the rhythm of it or the lack of rhythm. And not to say that lack of rhythm is a bad thing. Sometimes, we might intentionally want that, but it's just to create an awareness. But back to this tip, when we can look at how another person uses syntax or their word choice in particular, I always am fascinated by other writers' word choices, because it shows me that, oh yeah, that word would be a great word to use in a description of this or that. And it also can show us some really unique ways of building and maintaining metaphor. And we can also, in the process, expand our vocabulary. So reading someone else's work can be highly, highly educational for us. Just to look at, like I said, syntax, word choice, vocabulary, and it can really help us embellish our own writing. So I really recommend that you read for that purpose. Okay, tip number 3. It's important to read other people's work to see what works and what doesn't. So I'm thinking here about the overall feel of a novel, all right? And I have an analogy to kind of make this point, which may feel a little tangential, but stick with me. I think you'll see what I mean. Have you ever been around a person who just has a way of allowing everybody around them to feel seen and heard in that moment, just for being who they are? It's the best feeling, right? And I happen to think, honestly, that I'm really good at doing that. And don't get me wrong, I don't claim to be perfect. I'm sure there are plenty of things around communication that I could improve myself. But I do know this one thing, I know I'm good at this. And there's a reason for it. And so I'll explain what I mean here. I like feeling that way. When I've been around someone and I walk away and I feel seen and heard and accepted, I love that feeling, and I want other people to feel that way after they have been in my presence. And so that's something that's always been very important to me. Well, I'm sure you've been in a circumstance where you're just simply sharing a story from your life and maybe how you feel about it. And the next thing you know, the person you're talking to or the group that you're in start to pick it apart. They pick you apart. They start pummeling you with questions and really analyzing you. And I always leave that feeling a lot of things. It's because my boundaries have been busted, and it's a feeling I don't ever want to leave another person with. So, point of all this is, it's that feeling I'm talking about. The feeling of being seen and heard and accepted in that moment as a human living a life. So then that makes me think, how do I want people to feel when they read my work? And not to say that we have to leave people feeling good all the time, because let's face it, life is not good all the time. And many of us are okay with that. And we want to shed light on those moments and make meaning of those moments, right? And then when I kind of turn that around and think about, okay, how do I feel then when I read other people's work? I don't necessarily need to be left feeling good, like the world is full of hearts and rainbows. I like to sit with a book after I've read the last word and I close the back cover. I sit in that moment and I savor the feelings that I have and I identify them. And then I like to think back through and see if I can remember what the writer did that left me feeling this way. Because that's where the skill in writing comes. How do you, over the course of a novel, leave the writer with a particular feeling or a couple of particular feelings in the end? So I'm sure we've had these moments where we've read a novel and we feel like we've been through something, right? Which is what we all want, I think, as readers and writers. And you've probably found that this can be a conflation of feelings, because if it's done well, we don't ever have just one singular feeling about a person, place, or thing, right? And I think a good novel will leave us with those kind of conflicted, conflated feelings. It may be a feeling of nostalgia. It may be a feeling of sadness. It may be a feeling of connection with the characters and love for them even. And so, like I said, I like to trace back through and kind of figure out, and I don't spend a ton of time on this. I don't spend this pleasurable experience I've had into study, but I just like to think back through, like, what did they do that left me feeling like this? And so I think this is a really valuable way and reason to read other people's work, is just to sink down into the emotions that are evoked for you after you've read the last word, close the back cover. And so one example I have of a novel that left me not feeling good, and I didn't even finish it, to be honest. I just couldn't. I mentioned it earlier, was Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. You know, granted, he is highly revered and canonized, but I don't think that necessarily means that everyone needs to read him or read that novel, because it left me so confused, and not in a good way. I think sometimes novels can leave us with questions, questioning ourselves and the world, and I think that's a good thing. But this was just flat out confusion for me. My brain doesn't work in a way that I guess is needed to take in that novel. novel. And so for me, I would not want to write a novel like that leaves people feeling that way. And so from this, I can assume that probably people who want to read my work are maybe wired a lot like me. And so that informs a lot for me as a writer, what I can do for them. Because I know what I want them to feel is that they've been taken through an experience, whether pleasant or not, and that I have somehow made meaning of it for them. And maybe in the process, they will either feel validated, they will agree, maybe they will be shown a new way of seeing things, and that it may help them in some way. And even if it's just for them to feel like they felt connected to my protagonist, that is what matters to me. And so by reading other people's work and thinking about how they achieved the feeling I was left with can help me, and I think it can help you too. So try that approach in your reading and see what it does for you. Number 4, reading is just good for you, not just as a writer, but as a human being. And I will do a whole other video on the science behind what reading does for us because I find it really fascinating. But for now, just very briefly, reading is good for us. And it's not just good for our imaginations, it's good for our health. And it actually makes us better people. This is one thing science has found, is that reading fiction, in particular, especially literary fiction, makes us more empathetic. So reading will make you a better human. And I think that's great. And that's why we need to write our stories. It's why you need to write your stories. It's why I'm here. So like I said, I will do another video about this and go over it in more detail. But just know that reading is just good for you. Good for your health. It's good for your self-improvement. All right, number 5, reading is one of the healthiest escapist activities that I know of. And granted, I know plenty of other escapist activities that call my name all the time that are not so good for me. But writing is not one of those. Writing is one of the few that I am called to that is very good for me, and I know this. And so I mentioned at the beginning of this how I'm wanting to overcome this screen addiction that I have as I'm making a video on a screen that I will give to you to watch on a screen. So I know, I get the paradox. But that aside, I'm really working on bringing reading back into my life. And I'm really looking at those moments. When do I pick up my phone to start scrolling? When do I feel the need to start playing a movie? And I've been likening it to, I used to be a smoker. And it made me start thinking of, well, when were all the times that I smoked? It was as soon as I woke up in the morning. I know, gross. Right after I had a meal, during a conversation, as soon as I got in the car, all these times. And I was a very heavy smoker. And I quit many years ago. I think I quit like, God, I don't know. I'm trying to do math here. 40 years ago, I quit smoking. So yeah, it's been a long time. But thinking back to that has made me think about when I pop open my phone or my laptop to kind of break that habit. Because reading is one of the best escapist activities that I can do for myself. And I don't mean escape in a bad way, like not face life, not take care of things I need to take care of. But we live in such a crazy, overstimulated, dare I say, fucked up world. Can I say fuck on YouTube? I don't know. We'll see. But sometimes we just need to retreat and be somewhere else. And, you know, I understand why people do drugs. Life's not easy. And especially for those of us who are wired very sensitively, the world is just a hard place to be. And most of us have a very hard time being in it. And so reading is a great way to remove ourselves from all that harmful stimuli and go somewhere else for a while and meet some new people and feel things without having the repercussions that living, breathing humans bring with them oftentimes, right? So I love reading for this reason. So if for no other reason, please read to escape in a healthy way. All right, number 6, you must read because reading is the other side of the coin of the world that you're in. You're a writer. And my guess is you're writing because you want to publish your work. And if you don't, that's totally fine. Like, we don't all need to write stories because we want them to be published and out in the world. But if that is what your hope is, it just doesn't make sense to me to not read if you want to create books. Or even short stories that get published in books. Because think about it. Have you ever heard of, say, a musician who does not listen to music? Okay, there may be one or two and you may know them, fine. But in general, all the musicians I know, and I've known a lot in my life. I've known many musicians very, very personally in my life. And they all listen to music. For the same reasons, I think writers should be reading books. Have you ever heard of a chef who doesn't like food? No, that would be preposterous, right? It sounds crazy to me to even think of that. Do you know filmmakers who don't watch films or go to film festivals? No. It's their life. It's their world. They eat, sleep, and breathe it. And that's why I'm so adamant right now for myself to get back to my reading, because it's my world. And of course, I also write scripts, which translate to stories on screen. But I know for myself, I need more of a balance. And so that's why I keep bringing it up. It's on my brain, as you can tell. So I really encourage you. I've had students, I've had clients who've said, yeah, I want to write a novel, but I don't read them. I just think, what? Like, that just sounds like crazy talk to me. I don't understand it. I'm just, as you can tell, highly opinionated about this. So I believe if you want to write a novel, you must be reading novels. You absolutely must be. And there are times I will agree during the writing process that it would be invasive to read another novel. Like when I was in the hardcore tail end revision part of my novel, last thing I want to do is read another novel because it would take me out of my own dream. Well, when we're in that heavy space, no, we don't want to be doing it. But there are time between projects. There are time at the beginning of projects. There are plenty of times we can read novels, even if we're writing them, all right? So read novels, please. And I want to add this to number 6, is that I don't necessarily think you need to be reading all of the recommended canonical novels that are shoved down people's throats when they get, say, degrees in English, because I don't think they're all good, to be honest. And I feel very fortunate that in my education, my bachelor's, I went to a very different kind of school that allowed us to create our own curriculum and choose our own reading. And it was very intensive, a lot of work, but we had the freedom to do that, and it was extremely liberating, and it was far more better educational experience than the one I got with both of my master's degrees. I'm not suggesting that you read everything that's been canonized. Read the ones that resonate with you and let the rest go. I will say, in some people's opinions, I have holes in my English education because I didn't read a lot of those. There are a lot of the classics I've not read. So don't feel pressured to read books that everybody else says you should have read. I think pick up novels by writers that resonate with you. They can be contemporary, they can be classic. Just read novels. Okay? Number 7. So I kind of touched on this with tip number 2 to see how other people use words, but in particular, we can build our vocabularies when we read other people's work, obviously, right? And of course, when we talk about building vocabulary from reading novels, it's very different than building vocabulary for, say, academic essays, academic papers. But when I think about building vocabulary, I'm thinking of this in terms of building your own vocabulary so that you can maybe describe a setting in a more descriptive or poetic way with new words. You know, and granted, we don't want to use words that are far outside the realm of the way that we speak in our writing, but if we're speaking through another character, say it's in first person, that character may use words that we don't ourselves, or that we may not typically use in our writing, if we're writing in, say, third person. So by building our vocabulary from reading other people's work, we can use different words, better words maybe, and create more sensual, tactile experiences for our readers. And we can also get, I think, the more we expand our vocabulary, we can also get way more precise in the language that we use when we describe spaces or settings or food. We can write about food descriptions. We can write about physical characteristics of our characters and make them that much more enticing and intriguing and lovable if we expand our vocabulary. And in doing that, we can then really pull in our readers with this really nice hug and keep them embraced in this story and aligned with the characters and really feeling things. All the characters' feelings, all their emotions, their triumphs, all of it. So obviously, the bigger our basket of words, the more tools we have at our disposal to create those really rich, engaging story worlds and characters that we want people to read and keep coming back for. All right, so those are my 7 tips. I hope you find them useful. I'd love to hear which ones resonated with you in the comments. And like I said, if you want that reading planner, please go get it. It's not going to be up there forever. So go get it. It's on my website, johnnymazzacco.com. And as always, sending you mad writing mojo. Happy writing.